This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest is joining us today from St. Louis, Missouri, Jonathan Moxey, head brewer for Rockwell Beer Co. Welcome to the podcast, Jonathan.
Hey, Jamie. Thanks a lot. It's good to be here.
If you are an all-access subscriber to Craft Beer and Brewing, you may have watched Jonathan's class recently on brewing session strength beers. Jonathan's got a history of brewing for one in particular fantastic brewery also there in St. Louis that we're big fans of, Perennial. We're going to walk through some of the background, and then of course, I guess it was last year, 2019, when you jumped on board with Rockwell Beer Company to launch that brewery. Am I right?
2018, but yeah.
2018, gosh.
Yeah,
it was 2019 when I first got there.
Yeah, well, last year was 3 years, so it did.
Oh, man. Where's the time gone? It feels like forever. Anyway, we're going to talk about, Jonathan at Rockwell has done some really nice work brewing everything from Foeder Baltic porter to light session strength beers, mixed culture beers, even playing around with Quake yeast. We're going to talk a little bit about a lot of that experimentation. But first, as the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, reliability, and dedication to their customers' craft. New this year, redundancy meets efficiency. G&D's micro-channel condensers are built with an all-aluminum construction, which eliminates galvanic corrosion. Using half the refrigerant of conventional condensers with fewer brazed connections translates to a lower GWP and less opportunity for leaks. Call G&D Chillers today to discuss your project or reach out directly at gdchillers.com. Also, BSG is partnering with Leopold Brothers to bring a new line of small batch handmade malts to brewers and distillers. Leopold Brothers is a family-owned floor malting operation and distillery and 2020 James Beard Award finalist located in Denver, Colorado. Since brothers Scott and Todd Leopold first opened their doors in 1999, they've created everything from classic unfiltered lagers to a number of spirits, including a wide array of whiskey styles. Learn more about the upcoming malt line by going online to bsgcraftbrewing.com or contact BSG at 1-800-374-2739. So I should also mention that we did profile Rockwell as a breakout brewer in Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, and so there's also more for subscribers and readers of Craft Beer and Brewing if they want to delve into that specific history. But for those that may not have seen or read that story, Jonathan, catch people up on your brewing history and the kind of steps that led you to the point where you are today as head brewer for Rockwell.
Yeah, so I actually I started brewing in my backyard whenever my wife and I were living in New York City. We lived there for about 6.5 years, and I graduated with a degree in journalism and realized very quickly that I did not want to be a journalist. And then it's just kind of up to,
What do you have against journalists? Moxey?
I have, quite the opposite. I have a lot of respect for journalism. I just figured that the world didn't need another shitty one. So if you didn't have the fire in my belly to get up and do that every day, I needed to find something else to do. And so I tried out a number of different things, and along the way, my friend Matt Fitzgerald taught me how to homebrew, and I hooked up with the New York City Homebrewers Guild, and it was a heady time to be in a homebrew club. There was a lot of
what years are we talking here?
Like 2009 to 2012. So like out of that homebrew club, we've seen, and I'm bound to miss a few, but KCBC, Fifth Hammer, Finback, people that have brewed at Other Half and Carton and Little Fish, and I mean that's just in the Northeast,
right?
And then me, and so it was there were plenty of people that have been doing it for years as a as a hobby and just something to do on the weekend. But then there were also a group of us that were like, hey, like we want to make a go at this. Let's make ourselves better as quickly as possible. And so did that. Was fortunate enough to pick a lot of professional brewers' minds along the way, and then my wife and I, like, we knew that living in New York City was always going to be a limited engagement. And really even having a brewery in New York was kind of a pipe dream at that point, because they hadn't passed the Farm Brewers Bill that made it the math work for breweries in the 5 boroughs.
It seemed I was in New York City in 2009, moved out in 2010 to Colorado, but same kind of thing. Like the beer world seemed to blossom right after I left. Thanks, New York State.
Exactly. And but while I was up there, I'm originally from Missouri, and my wife and I were trying to figure out, like, all right, you want to be a brewer, where do you want to go after that? And we thought about all of the the fun places to live, like Denver or Portland or San Diego, that are mature, saturated beer cities. But 2011, 2012 was an incredibly exciting time for St. Louis. Like Schlafly was well established, 10 years in at that point. 20 years in at that point. But you saw Perennial and Second Shift and Urban Chestnut and Four Hands and Civil Life, all just, like that wave of breweries that really put St. Louis on the map as a craft brewing scene. And it was just like, man, like, why don't we just be close to our family and go on vacation whenever we actually want to go on a vacation, and live with, near our folks the rest of the time. And so I was very fortunate. I met Tom Schlafly and Dan Kottman, as well as Phil Wymore, while I was living in New York. And Dan offered me an internship at Schlafly, which I was kind of leaning toward going that route anyways. Didn't really want to go back to brewing school and then go to somewhere else after that without a guaranteed job on the other end. I'd rather work for free for a bit. So I did that, and then I told Phil Wymore that I was wanting to work for him until he felt fit to pay me, because at that point, I was really into mixed fermentation and Belgian style beers, and interested in oak aging. And at that point in time in St. Louis, Perennial was the only game in town that was doing that year round. So I moved back Thanksgiving 2012, did a month-long internship at Schlafly, and then I moved over to Perennial shortly after that, and was there for 5.5 years.
Obviously, we everybody knows Perennial and knows the kind of mark that Perennial has made on the brewing world. But at the same time, I mean, Perennial was even learning through that process of mixed culture fermentation and and Belgian style brewing. And when I taste Perennial beers now versus tasting those Perennial beers from 2013, 2014, I mean, you can taste the experience that's just been gained over that short amount of time. Talk to me a little bit in your progress of learning along the way in that kind of context, from those earlier days of mixed culture fermentation to today, some of the kinds of key shifts and learning moments that happened.
Yeah. So like Emily and Phil Wymore, who own Perennial, have always been, like, in addition to being really good friends, were very gracious employers, and also very encouraging for us to experiment. One of the things that we had was Thursday night. There was a new beer every Thursday night, and it was a lot like open mic night. Like that may be something that we fermented in buckets, something that maybe we only had 4 or 5 gallons of, but like, let's try it out. And people, it drew a crowd, and you get honest feedback on it. Of course.
I know what you're talking about. I've been there. I was there one Thursday night probably 4 years ago, when it was time to announce, and it was gather around, stand up behind the bar, and yell out the story to everybody present, and made a little moment of it. Sure.
Yeah, and that was always a lot of fun. And in terms of mixed culture fermentation, like they were right there on the front end of that. Like to our knowledge, like they were the Savant Beer Cell was the first 100% Brettanomyces beer released in St. Louis, and we're just kind of going from there, and like figuring out a lot of stuff along the way. Like a lot of stuff was great, and some of the stuff like we learned from. And at the same time, Corey King was the head brewer there, and he was starting, a little something called a side project as his side project, just, the weird little beers that didn't fit into Perennial. And, I mean, we all know what happened with that. Like he's making some beer that is sought out, the world over, and rightfully so. But like all of us,
side project, they're all right,
Yeah, but I learned a lot.
Sure.
From being around that, and all of us, saw things in one another's successes as well as mistakes, and it was, just more experimentation and just trying to push things, try and do things outside of what was done at that point in craft beer.
Let's fast forward to 2018 as you decide to get on board with Rockwell Beer Company as a startup. One of the subjects I'd love to talk about, as everyone who listens to the podcast knows, is formulating that brewing identity for any kind of brewery. Coming out of a brewery like Perennial that had a pretty clear identity and a very focused brewing program on brewing these kinds of Belgian style beers, and then of course now responding to modern trends and broadening that canon into IPA and other kind of styles that people want to buy. How did you then, as you started working with the owners of Rockwell, thinking about a brewing identity for Rockwell that would stand apart from some of these brands that are so well respected, like Perennial, Side Project, Second Shift, Four Hands, Schlafly, etc. Talk to me a little bit about that, that thought process and that creative process behind building a brewing identity.
Yeah. So, I had been, I've been looking to potentially move on from Perennial for a little bit. Like it was a great place to work, but as you mentioned,
everybody gets that itch. Yeah.
Yeah. They were making world-class beer and are making world-class beer, and a lot of that pipeline, because of the distribution footprint, a lot of that pipeline was, are already allocated time-wise. You only have so much time and tank space, and there were other things that I just really wanted to do. And the more I thought about it, what I wanted to do was, it's kind of cliche, I guess, to say like, I want to brew the beer that I want to drink. But
yes, that is cliche.
Yeah, but really the focus of it was seeing this hyper specific specialty beers, like these the fruited kettle scours, the big barrel aged stouts, the adjunct stouts, that sort of thing, that really appeal to a very specific niche of the beer community. And then there's, I
guess you could say it as, I bet there are people here now who would like to drink the beers that I want to make that aren't being made here now.
Yes, and exactly. I think about, the 99.9% of people that have no idea what a barrel-aged Abraxas or a barrel-aged 17 or a s'more stout or something like that is, like they want a well-made Pilsner or a well-made pale ale, something like that. And that, to me, had a lot of allure. I also really wanted to draw the focus back to being not local for the sake of being local, but local for being part of the community, whether that is appealing to people that aren't necessarily beer nerds that just live nearby, or doing things to give back to the community that is around us and supports us.
And there's definitely a beer hall vibe to Rockwell, a modern beer hall vibe, a contemporary beer hall vibe. But that specific kind of beer hall approach wasn't necessarily the perennial or side project kind of brand or ideal. It's definitely more in line with that urban chestnut idea of make great beer that people can drink, together in groups and enjoy that kind of bigger environment. You've built some of that to an extent at Rockwell.
Yeah, I mean, like that has always been, kind of a guiding principle of what we've tried to do, both in the type of beer that we make, as well as the type of place that we want to run, whether that's the aesthetic, like you said, a beer hall, but also the way that we try to be accessible, hospitable, and unpretentious. A gathering place, which now more than ever we need. So some common space where people with differing ideals can get together and bump into one another and maybe find some sort of common ground.
No, there's a fun energy, I think, to Rockwell too, where there is like I said, a brightness and a contemporary modernism, that contrasts with some of the classic approaches in smaller beers. It feels fun, where Civil Life is so pubby, beautiful in the way that they construct small beers, but feels cozy and warm and small, and Rockwell feels energetic and bold and bright and contemporary, even if the beers may have a little more similarity to each other than the ideas of the brands.
Right.
But there are certainly different kinds of consumers that can be attracted to similar beer styles in different kinds of contexts and different kinds of brands. Let's pivot and talk a little bit about, again, that foundation of the beer program itself and some of the cores that you built around some of the foundations of that beer program. Before we do that, a brewery might have 99 problems, but your fruit supplier shouldn't be one. Old Orchard is already known for their quality concentrates, but they also pride themselves on consistent product and reliable supply. When brewers need assistance, Old Orchard is just an email, phone call, or even a text away. Based in Greater Grand Rapids, Michigan, better known as Beer City, USA, Old Orchard is core to the brewing community. To join their fruit family, learn more at www.oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, for years, Brewery DB has been the industry's only professionally curated source of brewery and beer information. In 2019, over 1 million taproom visits were made by craft fans searching for breweries on brewerydb.com. In early 2021, Brewery DB will unveil an all-new experience to help craft lovers get back on the brewery trail. To take full advantage of the enhanced marketing power of Brewery DB and to increase your taproom traffic, visit marketmybrewery.com. That's marketmybrewery.com. It's easy and it's free. So, Jonathan, talk to me about thinking of obviously, since you're approaching Rockwell with this beer hall vibe and with this open and accessible but modern kind of approach, what did you start to hang your ideas on for brewing? What were those beers that are going to be the things that people want to drink from Rockwell?
Sure. So the first beer recipe that I wrote, for Rockwell immediately after I came on board was Passing Clouds, our Belgian style wit beer. It's one of the beers that we led with whenever we opened, and is still has always been our number one seller. And I'm happy to admit that the reason why I wanted to brew that beer is because Allagash White is not distributed into Missouri, and
yeah,
I'm an unapologetic fanboy, and anytime that's on draft, I will order it. And I saw one, a real selfish itch that needed to be scratched, but also an opportunity in the market. Not having something like that, and that's thankfully something that's paid off. Other than that, I would say the other beers that were really kind of foundational were the idea of having a robust lagering program. Standby, which is our hoppy pilsner, was something that I wanted to have on at all time. as well as I really wanted to do uh, a Foeder lagered Baltic porter, which we are canning the second batch of Katzemir's this week, and it's really exciting. You know, like here in St. Louis with Side Project and Perennial and Main and Mill and Second Shift, like you get a lot of the big modern uh, barrel aged and stainless adjunct stouts and stuff like that. And I wanted a dark beer that kind of stood apart from that a bit. And I'm always more for porter than I am stout anyway. And I think that, you know, after having some of the classic Baltic porters, especially, you know, like, you know, you think about an American interpretation in Smutty Nose, something like that would be appealing to that same audience, but also be distinct.
Let's talk about that since you brought it up. And before I should mention that you did, speaking of Standby, your Hoppy Pilsner, you did win a bronze medal at GABF for that beer. So clearly there are some other folks that think you're doing a nice job with it too. But you've given us the segue in to talk about Foeder aged Baltic porter. Let's dive down a little deeper on that. You know, the idea of aging, you know, Baltic porter in a Foeder is not necessarily a historical one. You know, typically, you know, if wood tanks were used, they were pitch lined and didn't pick up that kind of wood aspect. Over the last few years, we've watched Foeder lagers become a thing in general. They are generally a modern invention of contemporary brewers. If you trace back that lineage, you know, to folks at Threes, you know, as it was a brewer that they threw into you know, a Foeder in order to neutralize it before they thought they were going to go mixed fermentation, you know, mixed culture in it, and ended up liking the product, and it kind of became a thing. And now we're seeing them all over the country. Number one, because Foeders are actually not any more expensive than stainless tanks, and so you know, in that sense, might as well you know, get some character out of it, or just have something you know, a fun process around that. From your perspective, though, you know, as you're trying to build inspiration for Katzmir's, where did you go, and you know, what did you pull from, and you know, as you made some creative decisions around how you were going to do that, you know, what were some of those decisions that you made?
Yeah, so like I mean the Foeder portion, I mean, absolutely came from you know, the beers that we tried at Threes, you know, before. I mean, I was still traveling for Perennial at that point, and having that, and you know, like I was incredulous whenever I first saw it on the menu. I was like, you know, how are they going to do a clean beer there? And it's tough, but it can be done. You have to have your process down, and you know, what I saw or tasted rather was that the oak character is much more in a supporting role. Like it's not like, you know, putting it in a spirits barrel or wine barrel or something like that. And when we got our beautiful new Foeders from Foeder Crafters, we went with a light toast, heavy steam, and even after that, you know, they had been sitting in our building for months, swollen. I had to fill it up with a garden hose because we were still under construction, and Foeder Crafters and Wild Goose were the only people that hit their production timeline. So we had Foeders and a canning line and nothing in between. But yeah, so I wanted, you know, when it was time to fill it with the lagers, I wanted something that was going to be complementary, so but not overpowering. So again, like we steamed the heck out of it, draining the hot liquor tank several times through the spray ball, and even still, that first beer out of there had a good amount of oak character in like a marshmallowy way. Once we got to the Foeder Baltic Porter with that darker beer, like it is very much um, a peripheral note there. Like there's not much oak at all, even after this batch was in oak, I believe 3 months lagering. And so you get a little bit of that toast, a little bit of that vanilla there that kind of rounds out the roastiness of the porter. And what I really like, in addition to it being a horizontal tank, which is just better for the lager, anyways, um, it's almost like that beechwood aging perspective where you're getting all that pores. So like the lager comes out impressively clear because all that yeast has glommed onto the wood and stayed behind.
That's really interesting. So you're saying that the wood surface tends to grab yeast and help it fall out of, suspension through that kind of lagering process.
Yeah, so that's been our experience. We
More so
started
than
off.
stainless. I mean,
Yeah,
huh?
we don't filter or fine any of our beer. Um, I I prefer it that way. I guess I'm strange in that I like a little bit of lager yeast character. A little sulfur, a little chalkiness. Like I don't want it to be bad. Uh, poorly transferred, but I enjoy standby two different ways. Like the days whenever it's fresh on draft, like we're drinking it. I was drinking some right now, and I had it canned a week ago, and so there's still just a little bit hanging in suspension, and it gives it a bit of a killer impression. But um, another week, and you'll be able to read newsprint through the other side, and it's much closer to a German or Italian pills at that point.
With Cat's Mirrors, though, let's. I want to also talk about some of the recipe decisions that you made along the
Sure.
way. Where did you look to for the basic building blocks of that Baltic Porter recipe, and what inspired you to kind of build your own, and what did you like? What elements of other Baltic Porters did you not like as much? And talk to me about first maybe building the mash profile for that, but and then we can talk about some of the fermentation ins and outs.
Yeah. So in terms of the flavor, like whenever I think about more traditional European versions, they have some of that dark fruit and caramel, that layered um, those layers of flavor, and so put that in there with a couple of different like there's some special B, as well as a little bit of English crystal malt in there, and some Carahel, um, and then looking to uh, more American versions like Smutty Nose, which I don't even know if they make Smutty Nose um, Baltic Porter anymore. But I drank my last one that I brought back from New York as I was doing research to write this recipe for Casimir's, and it's strong. It's like 10%, and most of the European ones that you find are like 6.5 to 7, and so I wanted a bit more of that heft, because I wanted it to be substantial, but also to wear it well. Like I think that is always a goal for us as brewers, that like if we're going to brew a strong beer, you're not going to know it. Like and I think part of that is, how we do, an element of almost sessionability, if you will. Like whenever we do our Maibach, it's uh, right at about 8%, but it doesn't drink like that. It drinks like 5.5 or so, and you can get in trouble with that. But that's why we got plenty of room to stretch out in here.
How do you accomplish that? How do you
I
make a 8 or 9% beer that drinks like a 5 or 6% beer?
It's really about having a healthy fermentation. Oxygenating. Getting your oxygen dialed in, fermenting cool, fermenting long, um, having really healthy yeast. We use exclusively Omega yeast here at Rockwell, and I've been constantly impressed by the knowledge of their staff, but also the quality of the product. Like it really is some killer yeast pitches that they bring in here, And so, yeah, like those things I think are um, the most important part. And with Katsumirs, like it's something that it can't be rushed. We whenever we're doing any of our Foeder lagers, typically we're close to terminal gravity before we're transferring over to the Foeder for lagering. Um, and we're also stepped down to lagering temperature. So if we're doing, a 5 or 6% lager that we're going to do in oak, it's probably 10 days before we get it over to the Foeder. But with Katsumirs, it's on its own schedule. And that's typically in stainless for, a month and a half to 2 months before it gets over to oak.
Sounds a terribly expensive beer to make.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that one of the benefits of being slower during COVID is that we have that luxury of tank space. But yeah, otherwise it's it takes its own sweet time.
Sure. So you talked about building a kind of mash profile with a little bit of that dark fruit. How do you throw some of the Baltic porter edge to that? And then, are you using the same base malt that you use for other beers in the brewery, or is there some consideration there? And then, yeah.
Yeah. So all of our lagers, even the Baltic porter, the base malt is the Varman floor malted Bohemian Pils. In a pale beer, I just love that really light, almost grassy character that it has, but also like it just it ferments out, and the resulting beer is just so clean and round. I find that especially with a paler lager, if you're brewing with a lesser malt, then it's going to show through. And I think that that's true even with the darker stuff. So we do that, but then about 20% of that beer is also Munich. And then for the darkness, that bite, it's a mixture of a black and chocolate malt from Simpson's, and we're looking at like 3.5% of each of those. So it's that bite is there, but it's really more about layers of chocolate, caramel, and some of that dark fruit in there.
Enough to kind of soften the edge of that bite so that it's there and it's firm, but it's not
Exactly.
shocking. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Hops. Talk to me a little about what hops look like in this Baltic porter.
The hops are one of those things that I really search for. We use a lot of German hops. This one has Mittelfrüh in it, and for that, like we're just doing a 15-minute addition, and it's something that you really just have to look for. I mean, I tell myself it's there, but I think that like there's like a slight herbalness there that's just kind of an accent as it warms, but I'd have to do a side by side without it in there to say if that's my mind telling me that or if it's actually there.
Just there because Mittelfrew is a good standard hop, and
because I'm
something
looking
that's not
for
gonna because you have it for other reasons, other things in the brewery too, and it's not gonna jump out on its own.
yeah.
Well, let's talk then about like the boil process. Is this an extended boil? Is there any difference to the way that you go about that brew?
Yeah, so we do a 90-minute boil on there just to to concentrate some of those flavors and to to boost the original gravity just a little bit. But it's nothing crazy long. Most of our beers, including the 100% pills ones, are 60-minute boils. We just do a good, very vigorous boil. We have an internal calandria, and we get it done there, and we don't have a problem with DMS or anything.
And then, as you're knocking out and moving into the kind of fermentation process, you mentioned you use omega yeast. Is there a consistent lager strain that you're using across all of the lagers, or does the Baltic Porter get something special?
Uh, so with the Baltic Porter, we use the German Lager 1, which is the Weihenstephaner 3470. And that's the same thing that's in our standby as well as some of the other lagers. I think anymore, lager yeast is the one that we switch around the most whenever we're doing different styles. Most of our ales have either single strains or blends that we have pretty well locked in, but the lagers, depending on what we're trying to get out of them, we will experiment more with that. And part of that is just, like me being relatively new to lager brewing as opposed to brewing ales. I brewed a couple of lagers as a home brewer, and then I wrote the recipe for perennial pills whenever I was still there, which was also the 3470. So now it's just, I'm calling the shots, and I got the opportunity to try out new things.
What does fermentation then look like? In terms of, I mean, obviously the Baltic Porter, you like a little bit of that fruit character, but you're probably not trying to, generate a lot of ester profile from that lagering yeast. How do you kind of dial it in where you like it?
Yeah, so we start off, we knock out at 62 Fahrenheit for the first day, and then by the time we come in the next day or midday, we're at Heikrausen, and then we start stepping it down at 2 degrees an hour for to 52, and that's where our primary fermentation goes. We'll do a diacetyl rest and at 60 about a weekend, and let that sit there for 3 or 4 days. If we're not dry hopping the Baltic Porter, but if we were dry hopping the beer, typically we'll do it after the diacetyl rest, and then we'll start stepping it down 5 degrees a day down to 32. And with most of our lagers, we like to let them sit for at least 7 weeks. And with cats, like it's typically in stainless for a month and a half, 2 months, and then in oak for another 2. And this time around, it was in there just a bit longer, just scheduling and stuff. But it has not suffered from the additional oak time, I assure you.
Sure. Why step down 5 degrees a day? Why? So that's what, about a 4 or 5 day process to get down to your lagering temps.
I think it's easier on the yeast that way. Like we're still, like we're not at terminal gravity at that point. I don't want to shock the yeast and cause it to not fully attenuate. Like all of our lagers are very dry. Typically ending at about 2 Plato. Katsumir's ends like 5.5 or 6. So it's a little, it's definitely chewy by our standards.
Yeah. Or as I'm thinking about, like, is that additional gravity there just balancing alcohol? Is that something that you've designed into it specifically because it's also picking up other wood character and serves other means? Talk to me a little bit about, the way that you think about balancing those flavors.
The higher finishing gravity on Katsumir's?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's, it's really, it's about balancing flavors. It's also about body, like having some of that residual sugar there. Like I don't, like it doesn't finish super sweet. There's not a super sweet perceived sweetness there. How many times can I say sweet? But like there is more than others, and like some of that, I just don't want the beer to come off as thin. Like I want it to be smooth and to have, a bit of an edge from the roasted malt and as well as the carbonation, but like I don't want it to be like there's nothing there.
Sure, sure. Well, it's a wonderful beer, and in fact, I've still got one from the August batch in the fridge that you had sent us for our best in beer issue. And if it weren't earlier in the day, right now, I'd be drinking one as we speak. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about some mixed fermentation, and then, or maybe some of your other lagers as well. But first, ABS Commercial is excited to be a part of today's podcast. ABS is a full brewery outfitter offering brewhouses, tanks, keg washers, and small parts. As a part of ABS Commercial's ongoing Give Back campaign, they'll be giving away an ABS Keg Viking keg washer in June. So make sure to periodically check the ABS Commercial Facebook page to find out when the contest opens up and how you can enter to win a Keg Viking. So you tell me, Jonathan, what do you want to talk about next? You want to talk about some mixed fermentation? You want to talk about,
sure. Yeah, let's do mixed fermentation.
Let's do it. So obviously you have this basis and this background now, playing around, experimenting, working with Phil and Corey at Perennial. And as you decided to, bring that idea of mixed culture fermentation, to some degree with you through beers like Polymath at Rockwell, how did you, talk to me a little bit about that kind of ideation process and how you wanted to put your own spin on this idea of mixed fermentation?
Yeah, so I think one of the beers that really first kind of split my head wide open was Fantôme Saison. As I was homebrewing and then, getting into mixed ferment beers at Perennial, excuse me, getting into mixed ferment beers at Perennial, that was something that really made my head pop open because, opening a Fantôme bottle is often, I've heard it compared to like opening a lottery ticket, right? Where you're either going to have a transcendent experience or something else is going to happen. Most of mine have been, fairly transcendent. And what I love about them is that, there's often a good, funky complexity, something that you can't quite put your finger on. And there may be an acidity, but the acidity is harmonious. Like it's not a driving factor. And I think for my palate, a lot of American mixed ferm beers are much more acid forward and there aren't the additional layers there. And so what I wanted to bring in with Polymath was I wanted that acidity, but I wanted it to be soft and I wanted it to be balanced. And I also wanted Brett complexity. And so I had brought together a collection of different cultures from various sources, as well as I brought a strain of Brettanomyces to the brewery that I had got for free from a homebrew shop whenever I was living in New York. There was a microbiology student there named Dmitry Serganov, and he dropped off a bunch of vials from Brett strains he'd isolated from Cantillon Iris. And it's like, they're free, they don't cost anything, just like let us know what you think. And I used it, and it was, as a utility player, it worked great in mixed ferm. It was 100% Brett for saisons, as well as like doing a pale ale. You could do a lot of different stuff with this yeast. And so I wanted that to be part of the program. And whenever you put it in Polymath, people would think the beer was fruited because, there's just like this really powerful peach essence to it. And there's no fruit, or at least there's no fruit yet. There are fruited versions that are on the way that I'm excited about. But yeah, I wanted to, kind of take some of the American aesthetic, but also like look more to, some of like the Fantôme beers and some of the qualities of other saisons in Belgium that maybe weren't even mixed fermentation, but like still were yeast driven.
What you mentioned that you aim for light acidity and very light and balanced acidity. Certainly brewers today seem to be constrained by certain demands of consumers, which for some reason seem to like, slightly out of balance, excessively acidic beers. At this point in our evolution, I think, there are brewers that are helping change their minds, thankfully, and moving this conversation so that these mixed fermentation beers can certainly, play on that lighter side. But for you, what is that kind of ultimate goal is in terms of TA or in terms of pH? I don't know how you measure that.
I measure it by taste.
Oh, okay.
I don't.
Highly, highly scientific.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely a rustic approach. In terms of those beers, like if we're doing a quick sour beer, I aim for 3.3. But whenever we're doing the mixed firm pitches and the acidity develops over months, like I'm honestly like I'm just tasting it.
Yeah. Um, in terms of also building that idea of balance, are there specific kind of malt approaches that you take in order to build the flavors that bread and that mixed culture can play off of, so that it has a canvas from which to build?
Yeah, absolutely. Like we're using malt, like varying the malt as well as doing a bit with the water. Adding, like we love calcium chloride here at the brewery because just that added roundness that we're getting in a lot of our beers. But in terms of malt, like we think about, in addition to the Pilsner malt base, that's kind of a through line. Also, just adding various adjunct malts. Love spelt and that slight nuttiness that it gives to it. The spiciness of rye, which I think plays really well with lactic acidity, oats and flaked wheat. Those are more building body as well as head retention. Like having an acidic beer that still has foam to it is a rarity, and it's always a
Yeah.
goal. But we're doing that, and then
What does it take to
also,
achieve that? Talk to me about your tricks on that. Generally, obviously, high protein stuff. Malts tend to yield out better head retention in that. But
I
are
think
there?
that's the main, at least for us, like that's our main tool is really building in the flake grains as well as the higher protein stuff,
Are there
like
mash
spelt.
steps or are there mash pH goals that kind of help you achieve that head retention? I mean, certainly I've read some stuff around that hitting those not just mash steps, but also hitting very specific kind of pH levels through that mash process can help
Yeah,
aid
so
in that retention.
we're typically not doing step mashes for the mixed firm beers. Like we're typically just mashing at 152, sometimes 154, like nothing even crazy high
Right.
with the saisons. Like we do step mashing with the lagers, but just haven't seen the benefit so far with polymath specifically, and with the acidity. We're starting, you know, 5.2 to 5.4. So again, like nothing out of line with like what we'd have for an IPA.
Yeah.
Another thing that helps with foam is that we really do hop throughout. Like I'm a pretty firm believer in kettle hopping, whether we're doing an IPA or we're doing a mixed firm beer. Like I'm going to have hops in there at multiple points in the process, and I think the polyphenols there are helping out with that for sure, and also adding layers of flavor.
Creating other compounds too that the Brett will ultimately transform and work on. What
Indeed.
is that? What's that hop process look like in your mixed firm beers like polymath?
So polymath is we're using. I fell in love with crystal hops from
From
Hophead
Michigan?
Farms out of Michigan. Yeah, I. It's been 4 or 5 years ago now. When I was still at Perennial, we were taking part in like a tap takeover event that they were doing with Hop Leaf in Chicago, and I just I just listened to a podcast with Ron Jeffries talking about band beer, and he was talking about crystal hops, and I was like, "That's cool." I'd never considered using crystal hops in anything. Nobody was talking about crystal hops at that point, and then we got these crystal hops from Michigan, and it's just like the brightest. It was like smelling a glass of orange juice, just like the purest essence of
Huh.
orange without any of the other, more perfumey aspects that you might get from the Pacific Northwest. And we put those in a Foeder saison there at Perennial, and it was dynamite. Like it smelled like a fruity cocktail, just really the essence of citrus. So with polymath though, like like we do first hopping with most of our beers, and then in the kettle we're doing 30 and 5 minute additions. The last batch of polymath we did mostly crystal, but we also had some Amarillo on hand, which I'm a big fan of, like that kind of apricot that you can get from there. I thought that'd be cool. And then we'll transfer over to the whirlpool and do another steep before we knock out. And that's kind of where the big, aromatic punch comes in. And I think that
Using all
even
these
though,
contemporary IPA tricks to make your mixed culture saison, huh?
yeah, and I think some of that carries through, like, and part of that is, like it's like being less acid forward. It gives that room to stick around, even though, our first batch of polymath was in and out in 4 months. And then the next batch we left in there for a year. And so it's kind of an evolution of what we wanted that beer to be, but you can definitely taste similarities there, even though they're different ages.
Let's talk a little bit about kind of generating that funk component. Now you've got your fun Brett strain, that's creating kind of stone fruity stuff, but and you're not mashing extraordinarily high to leave kind of hard to ferment or dextrinous kind of elements there for Brett to chew on over a very extended amount of time. Are there any other consider? And it doesn't sound like you're using aged hops, which might produce some of those kinds of cheesier, funky elements that Brett can then also work to transform. How do you build that subtle funk layer then that is part of that expectation with mixed fermentation farmhouse and saison beers?
I think like I think we've been very fortunate so far with just the cultures that we've grown up, like and that just started from kind of that DIY homebrew mentality where you're sitting around and you're like, hey, I like that beer, and you take the dregs and you grow it up, and then over time it drifts and it kind of becomes its own thing. But we have a culture that we keep going in the brewery, and now it's going in the Foeder. Um, and I think that is what's responsible for it.
Are there how have you kind of massaged and selected that culture over time in order to kind of get it to exactly where you wanted it to be?
I think in terms of keeping it where we want it to be is part of that is just the hopping, like keeping it from becoming too acid forward that way. And then we just we've got a carboy, and then we've got a Foeder, and the carboy we refresh every couple months. Like typically, if we're brewing standby, we'll dump it out and we'll refresh it and keep it going that way. And
Feed it some
it's
fresh Pilsner wort and
yeah, like something that's not too characterful on the malt side, but also like has got plenty of hop matter in there as well as IBU that's going to keep things from drifting too far afield.
So you mentioned you've got some fruit versions in the works. Talk to me a little bit about kind of extending the family of mixed culture beers at Rockwell.
Yeah, so that was always something that was, important to me because, like while I think that there's definitely times and places for quick sours, I'm not hating on those at all. Like, I think that a lot of them tend to become pretty monochromatic. They you make a sour, like we have a sour wort recipe, and then we're going to put a bunch of Oregon fruit on it, and it sells very well. Like somebody sees a glass of purple from across the bar, and they want that. What we wanted to do from the outset was kind of use that to get started as we built up our mixed fermentation base, but then challenge the consumer a little bit with something that was perhaps a little more elegant and a little more nuanced. So
Sure.
what we've done.
My hot take on that is that that entire class of heavily fruited quick sour beers might as well all be seltzers, and they probably will be within the next several years. Where, as the beer character is less important than the fruit character, why not simplify and make the fermented character more straightforward to let that fruit become its thing, and just let beer be beer. Anyway, that's
yeah. No, I mean, I completely agree with you. I think that I think there's a lot of truth to that, and I think that would also be a much easier way to get there, get that done. What we're doing now is we had a batch of mature polymath, and so we split it two different ways. We have a couple of unjacketed bright tanks that we're just kind of like using as aging vessels, as well as a stainless steel tote. So we did two for this first variation. We did two different versions. We did my favorite pie in the world, which is it's important to know that about yourself, is peach melba. So peach and
melba, okay.
Peach melba, peach and raspberry.
It's not as pecan pie is way better, but I'll.
I mean, like yes, but I don't want to make a pecan pie sour beer.
Fair enough. I understand.
So we started with 800 pounds of local peaches, and Missouri and Southern Illinois. Like, I didn't know this until I started working with Perennial, but like the peaches here are fantastic. Like people can talk about like Georgia or California, but like we grow really great peaches here, and they're fresh and they're relatively inexpensive. And so we processed all those by hand, and then we got another 400 pounds of individually quick frozen raspberries and put that in there on top. And then we did another version with blackberries and plums, red plums. And so those are both Melba's ready to go, and the blackberry plum is almost mature. And so what we're starting to do now, or what we're going to start doing next week is can conditioning mixed ferm beers, which
interesting. Sounds like a fun process.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. We got a separate manifold for the canning line, and we so we'll be able to swap out all the soft parts that beer touches, and then can condition those beers. Because I mean, to be real honest, like bottles don't move. Like bottles are right now are fairly dead for most things. When we released the first batch of polymath, I feel like it took close to a year. Say we bottled 10 barrels of it. It took close to a year to sell almost half of those bottles. The draft just flew. I mean, wow. Like the people love the draft, and they, it blew out very quickly. The bottles, 750s, they just sat, and until COVID, and we started selling beer through the drive-through, and then all of a sudden, people wanted beer out of 750s again, and the second half of those bottles just like disappeared almost immediately again. But it's not always going to be like that. God help
Right.
us. So we're Ben Bailey, our production and packaging manager. He was like, we should really try to figure out can conditioning. He's like, he's formerly sales at Perennial. Like he's got a mind for this stuff. And he was like, I think that, like all this stuff would really fly if we're doing can conditioning, and nobody's doing that right now, or not many people are doing that.
Right.
And so we're going to give it a go. The first through will be, we've got a Foeder pale ale that's funky, in like an Americanized Yankee Orval kind of way. That'll be the first one through, and then the fruited polymaths will be after that.
It'll be fun to see how that works out, and I love the idea of putting saison into 4-packs of cans. They are longer beers to make, and certainly you start adding fruit and they become more expensive beers to make. But consumers are also used to paying the prices they have to pay for beers with 8 or 10 pounds per barrel of hops in them, and hops are not cheap either. So
right.
And so the consumer stomach for paying that for a canned beer, is there now where it might not have been before. It's kind of interesting to see all of those factors working together to kind of support this. Can't wait to see how that works out. Looking at the long term, what does the next year look like for Rockwell, and where do you think the Rockwell is going to be in 4 or 5 years?
What I'm hoping within the next year is that we get a more a bit of a return to normalcy. I feel like we do distribute, but 85 pre-COVID 85% of our beer sold over the bar, by the glass, which was incredible for me. Like, one of my favorite things about being a brewer is being able to look back through the glass garage doors into the tasting room and, get that immediate gratification of seeing people enjoy, what we're working so hard on every day. And, it's getting better. But it's still, there's still a long way to go. I'm looking forward to having more of that. We have some, there are some fun projects for St. Louis that I can't talk about just yet. I'm sorry. Nobody,
That's all right.
No interviewer likes to hear that. We've got some.
I love the cagey tease like that, though. I mean,
it's just like stay tuned.
You're like waving your red flag in front of the bowl, and it's
I'm an ass. But we're a St. Louis brewery, and what I want to do in the next year, the next 4 to 5 years, is really to drive that home and to make sure that we're giving back as much to the community as what they're giving to us. Through our programming here at the tap room, as well as our partnerships. And I think, eventually what I would like to do is, I'm not opposed to travel. I love traveling for beer. Doing events where, say we do a temporary distribution agreement for a few pallets of beer, set up some collaborations, and then fly out, do some events, shake some babies, kiss some hands, and brew some beer and have a good time, and then go back home. What I don't want to happen is, what I see a lot of places around the country is, like you have all of these great bottle shops that have 1,000 different things on the shelves and nobody there to tell the story of those beers. I don't want our beer rotting on the shelf. I want you to have a reason I want you to taste it and then have a reason to come visit us in St. Louis.
A connection is one of the most interesting and important things about craft beer. And I think it's a reason that so many people are attracted to craft beer. When you break that connection, or brands grow bigger in order to satisfy business needs more so than thinking about what a consumer wants out of that equation, then things get a little more challenging. I think you're right. Like, when they have that connection and that reason to buy it, to consume it, or and to some any I mean, that again is what we see people being flocking to craft beer for is the same reason they go to farmers markets and like to buy from local purveyors, that understanding who's making the thing, why they're making it, knowing where their motivations are, and feeling like your consumption is a part of this broader connected experience. I mean, that's what makes craft beer special. That's what makes it not big beer.
Yeah, I mean, like, that connection is so important, and I see that that play out for us, like the way that people they care about more about our beer because they know who we are. They can come in here and they can see us work, and they see the people, our fantastic staff in the tasting room are there to greet them and take care of them, and they see what a fun time can be had at a craft brewery. I mean, one of the things that is really cool about our location is, like we're right off an area called the Grove, which is a bunch of bars and restaurants and music venues. Urban Chestnut is over there, and it's just like a place where people go out, but not necessarily beer nerds. And then people drive by here and they see the shipping containers outside, and they see the fire pit, and they see people just having a good time. And people, even though it says Rockwell Beer Company in letters 3.5 feet high outside, like they'll come in and they're like, what is this place? And, there's no pretense there at all. There's just, people there to warmly welcome them and say, like, hey, like, we're Rockwell, we make beer, come in, let's have a good time. And if you don't like beer, that's fine too. Like, we have a couple of really great, bartenders making cocktails, and we've got, the cider that we do, we've got some coffee on draft, and non-alcoholic things too. And people come in and, they may not be in any other tasting room in town or around the country, but they're having a good time here. And that's a connection that's made outside of that small, a super geek niche that's, chasing down, the next limited allotment beer, or checking in on Untapped or whatever. And we love those people too, but like, there's so much more that we can appeal to.
Well, you've built a beautiful space that appeals to the contemporary sensibilities of folks. You've got a beautiful approach to packaging with bright, colorful, and modern cans that, even when it's a mixed fermentation saison inside of it, makes it look cool to consume, and is certainly Instagram friendly. And, and so you're right, even for those folks that just consider themselves modern folks and love the aesthetic, it provides a clear way for people to feel connected to that kind of thing in a way that's different than some of the contemporaries and some of the breweries owned by folks you've worked with and worked for in the past. And it's fun to see that kind of different approach to identity, and even if there are some commonalities, at the core between the beer styles that are being brewed. G&D Chillers is the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling. Try Leopold Brothers malts from BSG. Get consistent product and reliable supply from Old Orchard. Take full advantage of the enhanced marketing power of Brewery DB, and check the ABS commercial Facebook page to find out how to enter to win a Keg Viking. Of course, if you'd like to support this very podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button, and if you're a pro brewer, consider our new all-access pro subscriptions that combine both of our magazines, exclusive online content, and more. And those subscriptions will also let you watch our online class with Jonathan here talking about brewing light and sessionable beers. And you can also see the inside of Rockwell and get some of the behind the scenes along the way. Jonathan, if people want to reach you or see more about Rockwell, where do they find you in real life and on the internet?
Sure. So the best place to experience Rockwell is here at the tap room. We're 1320 South Vandevetter in St. Louis. And online, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Rockwell Beer, or at rockwellbeer.com.
Cool. Thanks for chatting with me about Rockwell beers and your approach to brewing, Jonathan. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. It was a pleasure.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.